There comes a point when the mind can no longer protect itself from everything it has been forced to absorb. Other people's expectations become internal commands. Their judgments remain present even after they have left the room. Their emotions enter your nervous system. Their demands reorganize your priorities, and their approval begins to determine how you see yourself. What appears to be emotional weakness is often the exhaustion of a personality that has remained exposed for too long. A period of isolation interrupts this invisible invasion. Removed from the constant pressure to respond, explain, please, and perform, the social persona begins to loosen its grip. The silence may initially feel uncomfortable because it brings forward everything that noise kept buried. Resentment, fear, neglected desires, and parts of the personality that were rejected to maintain acceptance. Yet this confrontation is precisely where psychological protection begins to return. For Carl Jung, wholeness did not come from becoming invulnerable or indifferent. It emerged from recognizing what belongs to the self and what has been unconsciously absorbed from the collective. Solitude restores the mental shield. By rebuilding that distinction, you eventually return to the world, but no longer as an open surface upon which everyone can leave a mark. You return capable of listening without surrendering your inner voice, connecting without abandoning yourself, and standing among others without becoming psychologically possessed by them. Constant exposure to others weakens your inner boundaries. Human beings do not lose their psychological boundaries all at once. The process usually begins through small, repeated acts of adaptation. You change your tone to avoid conflict, hide an opinion to preserve acceptance, or suppress an emotion because it might make someone uncomfortable. Each adjustment appears insignificant, but together they teach the psyche that maintaining connection is more important than remaining internally honest. Over time, you become highly responsive to the emotional atmosphere around you, while gradually losing contact with what is happening inside you. Constant exposure to other people intensifies this pattern because the mind is rarely given enough silence to separate its own responses from external influence. Every interaction introduces expectations, judgments, moods, and demands that must be interpreted. When there is no interval between these encounters, psychological impressions accumulate without being examined. You continue carrying conversations long after they have ended, anticipating reactions that have not occurred and rehearsing explanations nobody has requested. The outer world begins occupying the inner world. From a Jungian perspective, participation in society requires the development of a persona, the psychological face presented to others. The persona is not necessarily false. It allows you to communicate, fulfill responsibilities, and function within different social environments. The difficulty begins when this social identity becomes more authoritative than the private self behind it. Instead of using the persona as a flexible instrument, you become trapped within the version of yourself that receives the least criticism and creates the fewest disturbances. This dependence changes the way decisions are made. Rather than asking whether a choice corresponds to your values, you instinctively calculate how others might interpret it. An ordinary preference becomes a social risk. A disagreement feels like a threat to belonging. Even necessary limits can produce disproportionate guilt, because the personality has learned to associate self-assertion with rejection. The person may appear cooperative and emotionally available, while internally becoming increasingly uncertain about what they genuinely want. Weak boundaries do not always look like passivity. They can also appear as constant defensiveness, irritability, or an intense need to control how one is perceived. When the inner identity is unstable, even minor criticism can feel invasive. The individual must then explain intentions, correct misunderstandings, or prove that a negative judgment is inaccurate. This endless defense of the persona consumes enormous psychological energy because the person's sense of stability depends on maintaining a particular image in the minds of others. The emotions of other people also begin to cross these weakened boundaries. Someone else's disappointment becomes your responsibility. Their anxiety becomes a problem you must solve, and their silence becomes evidence that you have done something wrong. This is not simply empathy. Genuine empathy allows you to understand another person without abandoning your own psychological position. Boundary loss, by contrast, makes it difficult to witness another person's discomfort without immediately reorganizing yourself to remove it. Digital exposure can deepen this condition because other people remain psychologically present even when they are physically absent. Messages, reactions, comparisons, opinions, and carefully constructed images enter consciousness throughout the day. The mind receives continuous evidence of how it might be judged and how it supposedly ought to live. Without periods of interruption, the psyche begins treating the collective voice as an internal authority. What is popular appears valuable, what is approved appears correct, and what is ignored begins to feel meaningless. The shadow grows stronger wherever adaptation becomes excessive. Qualities that could protect the personality, firmness, anger, independence, refusal, ambition, and healthy selfishness, may be pushed out of awareness because they conflict with the accepted image. Yet suppressed qualities do not disappear. They return indirectly through resentment, emotional exhaustion, sudden withdrawal, or intense reactions toward people who freely express what you have forbidden in yourself. The shadow reveals the psychological cost of being endlessly accessible. A period of deliberate solitude creates the distance necessary to observe this process. When the stream of external influence slows, the mind initially encounters the accumulated noise it has been carrying. Old conversations repeat themselves, imagined judgments arise, and emotions previously postponed demand recognition. This discomfort does not mean solitude is failing. It shows that the psyche is finally processing material that constant social exposure prevented it from understanding. Inner boundaries begin to return when you can distinguish connection from submission. You can care about another person's feelings without treating them as commands. You can receive criticism without allowing it to define your entire identity. You can participate in relationships without continuously performing for acceptance. Isolation, when temporary and balanced, does not have to become an escape from humanity. It can become the psychological interval in which you recover the part of yourself capable of meeting the world without being absorbed by it. Isolation interrupts the power of the social persona. The social persona becomes powerful through repetition. Every day you enter familiar environments and reproduce the version of yourself those environments recognize. You become agreeable around people who resist disagreement, emotionally controlled around those who punish vulnerability, and consistently capable around those who depend on your strength. Eventually, these performances stop feeling like conscious choices. They become automatic responses activated by the presence of other people. In Jungian psychology, the persona is the interface between the individual and society. It contains the attitudes, behaviors, and characteristics that make social participation possible. Without it, ordinary life would become chaotic because every private thought and emotion would enter public relationships without mediation. The persona, therefore, has a legitimate function. The problem begins when a useful social role is mistaken for the entirety of the personality. The persona is strengthened by feedback. Approval confirms that the performance is working, while rejection teaches you which qualities must remain hidden. A person praised for always being calm may learn to repress anger. Someone valued for being helpful may become unable to admit exhaustion. Another person admired for confidence may conceal uncertainty even from themselves. The social reward becomes a psychological contract. Acceptance is available as long as the approved identity remains intact. Isolation interrupts this contract because the persona temporarily loses its audience. There is nobody nearby to impress, reassure, obey, or convince. The expressions and responses that usually maintain your position are no longer required. Without external reactions to guide behavior, the personality must confront a difficult uncertainty. Who remains when there is no role to perform? This is one reason solitude can initially feel disorienting rather than peaceful. The first stage of withdrawal may still be controlled by the imagined audience. You replay conversations, construct explanations, and anticipate what others might think about your absence. Although physically alone, you remain psychologically surrounded. The collective expectations have been internalized, meaning that other people no longer need to be present to influence you. Their voices have become inner commands that evaluate your choices before you can experience them directly. As the silence continues, however, these internal voices become easier to recognize. You notice that some of your strongest beliefs are inherited expectations rather than personal convictions. Certain ambitions may have been pursued primarily because they produced admiration. Some relationships may have been maintained because leaving them would disturb your identity as loyal, patient, or indispensable. Isolation does not immediately provide answers, but it exposes the distance between the life being performed and the life being experienced. At this point, previously excluded emotions often enter awareness. Irritation may reveal where excessive accommodation has taken place. Sadness may show that a socially successful role has demanded a private sacrifice. Relief may appear when certain obligations are temporarily suspended, revealing how burdensome they had become. These emotions are not instructions that must be obeyed without reflection. They are psychological information about the cost of maintaining the persona. The encounter with the shadow becomes unavoidable because everything incompatible with the public identity has been placed there. The endlessly patient person discovers anger. The modest person encounters ambition. The independent person recognizes a need for support. The strong person meets uncertainty. These discoveries can be uncomfortable because they contradict the coherent image presented to the world, yet they also restore complexity to a personality that has become confined to a narrow social function. Healthy isolation does not require destroying the persona. The aim is to place it back in its proper position. It should remain a flexible means of relating to society rather than becoming the authority that determines your inner life. You can still be responsible without denying exhaustion, generous without eliminating personal limits, and confident without pretending to possess absolute certainty. The social identity becomes more honest when it is connected to the larger personality behind it. When you return to others after meaningful solitude, the old role may no longer fit as comfortably. You become more aware of moments when you are performing rather than communicating. You hesitate before offering automatic agreement and feel less compelled to maintain an image at any cost. The mental shield restored through isolation is this renewed distinction between what the world requires and what the self genuinely contains. The persona remains, but it no longer speaks with the authority of your entire being. Silence reveals what has been draining your energy. Exhaustion is not always produced by the amount of work a person performs. It can also emerge from the continuous effort required to suppress reactions, monitor behavior, and remain psychologically available to everyone nearby. A person may complete an ordinary day without any obvious crisis and still feel internally depleted. The missing energy has often been consumed by invisible acts of adaptation that have become so habitual they are no longer consciously noticed. Noise helps conceal this expenditure. Constant conversation, entertainment, obligations, and digital stimulation prevent the mind from observing its own condition. Attention remains directed outward, moving from one demand to the next before the emotional consequences of the previous experience can be understood. Busyness then becomes more than a schedule. It becomes a psychological defense against recognizing how much of one's life is being organized around expectations that no longer feel meaningful. When silence arrives, the first thing it reveals is often not peace but accumulated tension. The mind continues conversations that ended hours ago, imagines responses to criticism, and revisits situations in which something important was left unsaid. This mental repetition shows where psychological energy remains trapped. The event may be over externally, but internally the personality is still trying to complete a response that was interrupted, suppressed, or judged unacceptable. Silence also exposes the burden of emotional monitoring. Some people enter every environment scanning faces, tones, and gestures for signs of displeasure. They notice subtle changes and immediately wonder whether they caused them. This vigilance can appear considerate, but it may actually be a learned strategy for preserving safety and acceptance. When practiced constantly, it turns relationships into environments that must be managed rather than experiences that can be lived. Another source of depletion is the distance between genuine feeling and permitted expression. Anger must be transformed into politeness, disappointment into indifference, and uncertainty into confidence. The personality is required to produce the correct response while concealing the real one beneath it. Maintaining this division demands energy because both positions must remain active. The emotion continues to exist, while another part of the mind works to prevent it from becoming visible. From a Jungian perspective, whatever is repeatedly excluded from conscious identity does not simply disappear. It enters the shadow and continues influencing behavior indirectly. Unacknowledged resentment may become chronic irritation. Repressed ambition may appear as hostility towards successful people. A neglected need for rest may become an unreasonable reaction to ordinary requests. Silence makes these patterns easier to see because external distractions are no longer available to carry attention away from them. The people who drain you are not always openly hostile or demanding. Sometimes the deepest exhaustion appears around those for whom you feel obligated to maintain a specific version of yourself. Their presence may require you to be endlessly understanding, entertaining, strong, productive, or emotionally uncomplicated. The relationship consumes energy, not necessarily because the other person intends harm, but because your belonging seems dependent on keeping parts of your personality out of view. Silence can also reveal that some goals have been draining because they were built from comparison rather than inner conviction. A person may spend years pursuing recognition, status, or an idealized identity without examining whose approval the achievement is meant to secure. When external feedback disappears, the motivation weakens. This does not always mean the goal is wrong. It means the psyche is asking whether the effort expresses a genuine value or merely protects the persona from feeling insignificant. Recognizing these drains does not require immediately abandoning responsibilities or withdrawing from every relationship. Psychological insight becomes useful when it produces a more accurate distribution of energy. Certain conversations may require clearer limits. Some obligations may need to be reconsidered. Other situations may remain unchanged externally, but the internal compulsion to perform within them can begin to loosen. The essential change is learning where participation ends and self-erasure begins. Silence restores energy because it stops the automatic outward flow long enough for consciousness to observe where it has been going. It reveals which roles require constant maintenance, which emotions have been denied, and which relationships leave no room for psychological complexity. Once these patterns become conscious, they lose some of their hidden authority. Energy is no longer spent defending an identity that cannot contain the whole person. It becomes available for choices that reflect a more complete and honest self. The shadow restores the qualities you were forced to suppress. The shadow is often misunderstood as a hidden collection of everything cruel, shameful, or destructive within the personality. In Jungian psychology, its meaning is broader. The shadow contains whatever conscious identity refuses to recognize, including valuable qualities that once threatened acceptance. Courage, ambition, firmness, emotional sensitivity, creativity, and independence can all be forced into the unconscious when the surrounding environment teaches a person that these traits are unacceptable. This suppression usually begins through adaptation rather than deliberate choice. A child who is criticized for expressing anger may learn that being lovable requires constant calmness. Someone whose confidence provokes hostility may begin presenting themselves as smaller and less capable. Another person may hide sensitivity because vulnerability is treated as weakness. The trait does not disappear. It is separated from the identity the person is permitted to show. Over time, the conscious personality organizes itself around the qualities that receive approval. The person becomes patient, agreeable, undemanding, and predictable, not necessarily because these traits express the whole self, but because they once protected belonging. The rejected qualities remain active beneath the surface, deprived of language and mature direction. Because they were never consciously developed, they often return in distorted or exaggerated forms. Suppressed anger, for example, may not return as clear self-protection. It may appear as bitterness, passive resistance, or sudden irritation over minor events. Rejected ambition may become envy toward those who pursue their desires openly. Denied independence may emerge as unexplained resentment toward people who ask for help. These reactions are not proof that the hidden quality is inherently destructive. They reveal that it has been excluded for so long that it no longer knows how to express itself proportionately. Projection is one of the most important ways the shadow becomes visible. A quality that cannot be accepted internally is noticed with unusual intensity in another person. Someone who has suppressed confidence may interpret confidence in others as arrogance. A person forbidden to establish boundaries may condemn those who say no as selfish. The emotional charge of the judgment suggests that more is happening than an objective evaluation of someone else's behavior. Isolation creates the conditions in which these projections can be examined. Away from immediate social pressure, the person can observe recurring judgments without needing to act on them. The question is no longer simply whether another person possesses an irritating quality, but why that quality produces such a powerful response. The answer may reveal a neglected capacity that the conscious personality has been trained to fear. Integrating the shadow does not mean expressing every impulse without restraint. It means recovering the psychological function contained within the impulse. Anger can become the ability to identify violations. Self-interest can become responsible self-preservation. Ambition can become disciplined commitment, while pride can develop into dignity. Consciousness gives these qualities proportion and direction, transforming what was once disruptive into a source of protection. This recovery alters the structure of relationships. A person who reclaims firmness no longer needs others to recognize unspoken limits. Someone who accepts personal ambition stops depending so heavily on external permission to pursue meaningful goals. A person who integrates vulnerability becomes less threatened by emotional exposure. Each restored quality reduces the need to maintain a narrow identity designed primarily for approval. The shadow also restores energy because repression is psychologically expensive. One part of the mind produces a natural response while another part constantly suppresses it. The resulting tension can appear as fatigue, indecision, or the sense of living at a distance from oneself. When the rejected quality is consciously acknowledged, this internal division begins to lessen. The energy previously used to conceal the trait becomes available for deliberate action. The mental shield strengthened through shadow integration is not emotional hardness. It is the capacity to use the full range of the personality when circumstances require it. Kindness remains, but it is no longer defenseless. Patience continues, but it does not tolerate everything. Sensitivity survives without becoming submission, and independence develops without eliminating connection. The shadow restores what adaptation removed, allowing the individual to face the world with a personality that is not perfect, but more complete. Your mental shield returns when you stop explaining yourself. The compulsion to explain yourself usually begins before any explanation is spoken. It begins in the internal anticipation of being misunderstood. You imagine objections, prepare defenses, and search for language that will make your decision acceptable to everyone affected by it. By the time you speak, you are no longer simply communicating a choice. You are presenting your inner life before an invisible tribunal and waiting for permission to trust your own judgment. Explaining is not inherently a sign of weakness. Clear communication is necessary whenever decisions affect other people, responsibilities are shared, or misunderstandings could cause real harm. The problem arises when explanation stops serving understanding and becomes an attempt to control how others perceive you. At that point, the objective is no longer to provide relevant information. It is to eliminate every possibility of criticism, disappointment, or negative interpretation. This habit reveals how deeply the social persona depends on recognition. The persona wants to remain coherent in the eyes of others, reasonable, kind, loyal, mature, or innocent. When someone interprets your actions differently, the persona experiences the judgment as a threat to its existence. You may then provide more details than the situation requires, hoping that the correct explanation will restore the image you are trying to protect. Yet, excessive explanation often weakens the position it is meant to defend. Every additional justification suggests that your decision remains open to negotiation. Instead of communicating a boundary, you present evidence for why the boundary should be permitted. The other person becomes an authority who can examine your reasons, reject them, and demand better ones. What began as communication quietly turns into a request for approval. The psychological cost is considerable because you begin evaluating your needs through the imagined reactions of others. Rest requires a convincing excuse. Distance must be supported by evidence. A change of direction needs an argument strong enough to survive criticism. The need itself is never allowed to possess legitimacy. It must first be translated into terms that make it comfortable for everyone else. In Jungian terms, this pattern can indicate over-identification with the persona. The individual becomes more committed to appearing good than to recognizing the full truth of their experience. Anger is softened to preserve an image of calmness. Disagreement is disguised as confusion to avoid seeming difficult. The desire to leave is buried beneath elaborate explanations because directly admitting it would contradict the identity others have learned to expect. Solitude interrupts this performance by removing the immediate demand for social justification. In silence, you can examine a decision without simultaneously defending it. You begin to distinguish the reasons that genuinely matter from those constructed only to prevent disapproval. This does not make every private impulse correct, but it creates enough psychological distance to evaluate it honestly, rather than automatically surrendering it to collective judgment. Stopping excessive explanation also requires accepting a difficult limit. You cannot completely control the meaning other people assign to your actions. Even a careful explanation can be distorted by someone committed to misunderstanding it. Endless clarification cannot guarantee approval because perception is shaped by another person's expectations, insecurities, and interests. Recognizing this boundary prevents their interpretation from becoming the final authority over your identity. As the mental shield returns, language becomes more precise. You explain what is relevant, acknowledge legitimate consequences, and take responsibility where necessary. But you no longer expose every private thought in an attempt to prove that you are entitled to make a choice. A boundary can be respectful without becoming a debate, and a decision can be thoughtful even when another person dislikes it. The restored shield is therefore not silence used as punishment, emotional avoidance, or refusal to communicate. It is freedom from compulsive self-defense. You remain capable of listening, reconsidering, and admitting mistakes, without treating every objection as proof that you have betrayed someone. When you stop trying to manage every opinion, the energy once spent protecting your image returns to consciousness. You become responsible for the integrity of your choices, while allowing others to remain responsible for their reactions. You return without absorbing everything around you. The true purpose of isolation is not to remain separated from the world. Permanent withdrawal can protect a person from discomfort, but it cannot reveal whether inner boundaries have actually become stronger. Psychological restoration is tested through return, entering relationships, responsibilities, and collective environments again, without immediately surrendering the inner position that solitude helped recover. Before this restoration, every environment can feel invasive. Another person's anxiety changes your emotional state, their disapproval alters your decisions, and their expectations quietly become your obligations. You do not merely perceive the atmosphere around you, you absorb it and carry it forward. After leaving the situation, the external pressure remains active internally, shaping thoughts and emotions long after the original interaction has ended. Solitude creates a reference point that makes this absorption easier to recognize. In the absence of constant external influence, you rediscover the natural rhythm of your own mind. You notice which thoughts arise without prompting, which values remain meaningful without applause, and which emotions belong to your actual experience. This inner reference does not remove outside influence, but it gives you something against which that influence can be measured. When you return, you begin to notice the precise moment when another person's emotional state attempts to become your responsibility. You can recognize disappointment without immediately trying to erase it. You can witness anger without assuming it proves your guilt. You can understand anxiety without reorganizing your entire behavior around it. This distinction is subtle, but it marks the difference between empathy and psychological absorption. Empathy allows contact while preserving separation. You can understand another person's experience without treating it as your own identity or duty. Absorption removes that separation and turns every emotional signal into an instruction. The restored mental shield does not reduce sensitivity, it organizes it. You remain receptive to what others feel while retaining the ability to decide what genuinely requires your involvement. The social persona also becomes more flexible after solitude. You may still adapt your behavior to different environments, but these adaptations no longer determine your entire identity. Criticism can be considered without becoming a permanent verdict. Approval can be appreciated without becoming a source of psychological dependence. You participate socially while remembering that no single audience possesses a complete understanding of who you are. This return may create tension because people often become accustomed to the version of you that had fewer boundaries. Those who benefited from immediate availability may interpret reflection as distance. People who expected automatic agreement may experience independent judgment as resistance. Their reactions do not automatically mean the new boundary is wrong, but neither should every objection be dismissed. Maturity requires distinguishing genuine feedback from pressure to resume an old role. Shadow integration makes this distinction possible. By recognizing your own anger, selfishness, fear, and desire for control, you become less likely to project them entirely onto others. You can establish a boundary without imagining yourself morally superior. You can reject manipulation without assuming that every disagreement is manipulation. Acknowledging your own complexity protects you from both excessive submission and excessive suspicion. The restored shield is therefore permeable rather than rigid. A rigid defense rejects everything and turns independence into isolation. A non-existent boundary absorbs everything and turns connection into self-abandonment. Psychological strength exists between these extremes. You allow useful information to enter, examine it consciously, and decide whether it corresponds to reality before giving it authority over your choices. You return to the world carrying an inner space that does not need to be constantly exposed or defended. Other people can influence you without possessing you, disappoint you without defining you, and disagree with you without erasing your convictions. Isolation has fulfilled its function when you no longer require it to feel like yourself. The mental shield has become an internal boundary you can carry into relationships, allowing connection without absorption and participation without psychological surrender.